The novel of Jack and Janet Tripper didn't end with a grand finale. It continued in the quiet moments. It was in the way Jack still made Janet a chocolate soufflé every Valentine's Day, though he no longer hid rings in them. It was in the way Janet still brought a single lily to the bistro every morning. They eventually retired, handing the keys of Trippers to JJ and wooden petals to Lily. They moved back to a small apartment near the pier, where they could hear the ocean and watch the fog roll in. One evening, as the sun was setting over the Pacific, turning the water that familiar bruised purple, they sat on their balcony. The year was 2010. "Do you ever miss it, Jack?" Janet asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. The chaos, the disguises, the landlord pounding on the door. Jack looked out at the pier, where the lights were beginning to twinkle. He thought of the tongue-tied chef, the fake cowboy, and the man who had found his way home. "I miss the hair," Jack joked, patting his thinning scalp. "But the rest? No, because we're still here. January. The company didn't change. It just grew." He reached out and took her hand, a hand that had held his through 30 years of life. "Come and knock on our door," Jack whispered, reciting the old tune that had become the anthem of their youth. "We've been waiting for you," Janet finished, her voice clear and bright. And as the fog settled over Santa Monica, thick and protective, they knew that in the end, history wasn't just a comedy of errors. It was a romance of the highest order. A story of a cook, a florist, and the beautiful, messy, unsurpassed business of being in love. Chapter 44. The Pandemic and the Return to Wicker. The year 2020 arrived not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. The world shuttered its windows, and the vibrant life of Santa Monica Pier seemed to freeze in time. For Jack and Janet, now in their mid-70s, the isolation felt both familiar and alien. "It's like we're back in apartment 201, Janet said one afternoon, looking at their balcony. "And the coffee is much better," Jack added, handing her a cup. They spent those months, rediscovered the simple joy of their own company. Jack, whose joints now complained if he stood too long, taught himself the art of sourdough bread, a slower, more meditative version of the frantic cooking he had done for decades. Janet filled their small retirement home with so many plants it began to resemble the florist shop of her youth. But the silence was broken by the technology they once feared. Zoom calls with JJ in Paris and Lily in her downtown loft became their new regal beagle. Cody, Cindy's son, would often call from the New York ranch, showing them the vast, open fields that looked exactly like the Texas Jack had once described in his fake drawl. "The world is bigger than we thought, Jack," Janet whispered during a quiet evening. "But it all still fits right here." Chapter 45. The Austin Legacy Brand. As the world reopened in 2023, the Tripper legacy took an unexpected turn. JJ, returning from Paris with a chest full of accolades, decided to launch a new concept, the Austin Ranch. "It's comfort food, Dad," JJ explained, gesturing at the blueprints, but with the precision of a French kitchen. "I want to honor the man who wrestled steers, even if only in his mind." Jack was hesitant at first. "People will find out, JJ. They'll find out the cowboy was a lie." "That's the point, Dad," Lily interjected, having handled the brand's marketing. "In a world of fake filters and AI, a story about a man who lied out of love is the most authentic thing there is. People don't want a perfect cowboy. They want the guy who put on the hat for his friends." The Austin Ranch opened on Main Street, just a few blocks from the historical apartment building. The decor was a sophisticated blend of rustic wood and 1970s retro chic. Over the bar hung a framed, battered Stetson, the very one Jack had worn. The restaurant became a sensation. Critics didn't just praise the food, they praised the mythology. The story of Jack Tripper and his twin brother Austin became a piece of Santa Monica folklore, a urban legend that everyone knew was a ruse, but everyone chose to believe in anyway. Chapter 46. The Hollywood Knock Again. One evening in 2024, a sleek black car pulled up to Jack and Janet's home. Out stepped a woman with a sharp bob and a clipboard, the modern version of Janet, but with more power. "Mr. and Mrs. Tripper," she asked. "I'm Sarah Vance. David Vance's granddaughter. Jack and Janet exchanged a look of pure shock. "I'm a documentary filmmaker," Sarah continued. "I've spent the last 3 years researching my grandfather's letters. He wasn't a good man, but he was obsessed with you. He wrote about apartment 201 like it was the only thing in his life he couldn't buy." She wanted to make a film, not a expose, but a love story. She wanted to tell the world about the three who became two and the landlord who allowed it all to happen. "We've spent 40 years trying to keep our secrets," Jack said, his voice soft but firm. "Why should we tell them now?" "Because," Sarah said, looking at the sunset, "my generation is lonely. We have 1,000 followers and no roommates. We have apps for everything and company for nothing." "How you made a home out of a lie." Janet took Jack's hand. "I think it's time, Jack. Let the truth out. It's been waiting long enough." Chapter 47, The Heritage of the Three. The documentary, titled Company of Three, premiered at the Santa Monica Film Festival in 2025. Jack and Janet sat in the front row, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. When the screen showed the old footage of a young Jack Tripper stumbling over his Spanish verbs, the theater erupted in laughter. When it showed a grainy photo of Ralph Furley in his lime green suit, there was a collective sigh of nostalgia. But the final shot was the most powerful. It was a recent drone shot of apartment 201. The new tenants were visible through the window. 3 young people, 2 women and a man, laughing over a shared pizza. A legend on the screen appeared. In 2024, the Historical Board of Santa Monica designated apartment 201 as a permanent residence for students of the culinary and floral arts. The company remains. After the film, Sarah Vance presented Jack with a small box. Inside was a pair of silver spurs, jingling softly. "My grandfather kept these," Sarah whispered. "He bought them in Texas in 1981. He was going to give them to you, to mock you, but he never did. I think he was afraid that if he gave them to you, you'd actually become the cowboy he couldn't be." Jack took the spurs, his eyes moist. He always did have a flair for the dramatic. Chapter 48, The Unsurpassed End. The novel of the cowboy and the florist finally reached its golden hour in late 2025. Jack and Janet returned to the pier one last time before moving to a smaller house closer to their children. The fog was rolling in, that thick pea soup mist that had defined so many of their adventures. "Do you remember the night the airport closed?" Jack asked, leaning on his cane. "The night you made the pillow, Jack?" Janet laughed. "I remember thinking you were the most ridiculous man I'd ever met, and the most wonderful." They walked past the Austin Ranch, where the lights were warm and the sound of laughter spilled out onto the sidewalk. They saw a young man in a cowboy hat tipping it to a girl in the window. The cycle was continuing, the roles were being played, and the love was being found in the most unlikely of places. Jack stopped and looked at the ocean. He didn't see a cruise ship, he didn't see a Texas ranch. He saw a life well lived. "Mi llamo Jack," he whispered to the wind. "I know who you are, Jack," Janet said, pulling him close. "You're the man who stayed." They turned away from the pier, walking toward the car. The spurs in Jack's pocket jingled with every step, a soft, rhythmic sound that echoed through the quiet Santa Monica night. It was a sound of history, of comedy, and of a romance that was, in every sense of the word, unsurpassed. The Rendezvous. A Tale of Apartment 201. Prologue. The door at the top of the stairs. Santa Monica in the mid-70s was a city of gold and salt. The air smelled of jasmine and sea spray, and the nights were painted in the flickering neon of the Pacific Park Ferris wheel. At the heart of it all stood a modest stucco apartment building, weathered by the ocean breeze, but held together by the vibrant lives within. "Come and knock on our door," the wind seemed to whisper through the palm fronds. "We've been waiting for you." In apartment 201, the arrangement was unconventional, scandalous to some, but a sanctuary to the 3 souls who called it home. There were the kisses that were hers, the laughter that was hers, and the dreams that were his. Janet Wood, the sensible florist with a heart like a rosebud, waiting to bloom. Cindy Snow, the clumsy, golden-hearted secretary who saw the world through a lens of pure innocence. And Jack Tripper, a chef in training with a quick wit and a soul that hungered for more than just culinary perfection. They were a triad of friendship, a lovable space that needed a face. But in the City of Angels, even the most beautiful arrangements are subject to the storms of human emotion. Chapter 1. The Golden Hour at the Regal Beagle. The Regal Beagle was more than a pub. It was a sanctuary for the weary and a stage for the hopeful. On this particular Tuesday, the dim amber lighting caught the swirling smoke of a dozen conversations. Jack Tripper leaned against the mahogany bar, his eyes tracing the rim of his beer mug. Beside him, Larry Dallas, a man whose wardrobe consisted entirely of leisure suits and overconfidence, was scanning the room like a hawk looking for a field mouse.